Committee. I am joined by my colleagues, Council Members Rue, Buscaglia, Martinez, and O'Farrell. We've got a couple of items today, and we have a couple of speakers who are commenting on multiple items. So we're going to deal with that first, and then we'll move into the items sequentially. So we'll start with public comment speakers. Eric Previn, followed by Antonio Ramirez. 2 minutes for the items, and then you'll have a minute of general public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. It's Eric Previn from Studio City, CD2, and this is a very austere, and I'm rarely in this room. It's a very nice room, powerful. Appreciate that. And I know today the big item is the repeal of the old streets, the law that prevents us from putting back into effect some of these older streets. And I think that you've wheeled out a beauty, because it's really just, it makes a lot of sense. So I certainly admire what you're doing there, and I like to see it right here up on the paper meeting agenda. Now, across the hall, I noticed today they've got a new kiosk here down the hall where you can sign up to speak, which I did because I know, but at City Hall where they have, this is a 4 million population city of the 88 cities in LA County, I'm fairly sure it is the largest. And we meet Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at council. That's the full legislative body. One of the key components to meeting, and David Rue as an open government reform man knows, is having agendas available so that the residents can follow along. We do pay the bill, we pay the taxes, and we fund this whole operation, in fact, but we do need to be able to see what's happening, and therefore we need those paper meeting agendas. So I certainly appreciate that, and I don't want this to take away from the other fine work we're doing here at protecting the urban forest, Mr. O'Farrell. I think that it's very important to protect that, including the canopy, certainly. And I noticed that we're also rolling out some more civic center work, which I think is very important. And the one thing that I would say about the noticing of meetings, other than to immediately make sure that there is a small stack of copies in the city council meeting, is to also make clear for people who are coming from all over the world. Today is African American Heritage, but we've Mr. Rue honored some folks from Korea. It's a very powerful time in LA for all of us. And what we want to do is make sure people are comfortable in City Hall. So Hugo Rossiter and Vivian Swanigan of the City Attorney's Office with Tim McWilliams, he's not helping, but he's involved in the background, are providing a trespassing notice in bilingual. And it does have the language about the constitutional protections. So thank you.
Okay. No general public comments. So now we have Ms. Ramirez.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start with number one. Please, if we can stop censorship and throwing speakers out if they dissent or pose an opposition comment. And number three, stop the 1 minute speakers comments up to, and bring it up to 3 minutes to 5 minutes. And that's what I would like for number one. Number three, that's not going to happen. With the wetbacks and the gangbanging population explosion, they breed children like cockroaches. And
Mr.
number
Chair,
two,
she's not speaking on the agenda item.
Oh, I'm speaking on number three. We're talking about the health and security of cities' urban forests. So we're having a population explosion. And number two, third world ghetto immigration explosion with the approval of DACA, amnesty, and asylum. That also contributes to the expansion into the city's urban forest. And number three, with the massive poverty and homelessness, transients are now moving out into the urban forest to go under the radar. And for the rich folks want to get away from the city metropolitan urban blight, decay, and are now willing to pay developers for new private secluded high-end and a secured living communities. And again, destroying our lovely urban forests. Now, if you do not tackle the homelessness and poverty issue first, then the urban forest will no longer exist. Now, caveat, start tackling the homeless and poverty situation and think of the long-term and health and security first and foremost for the American people. Again, and number four, please hire military veterans. You need military veterans. You have, for all these jobs in the forest, please hire military veterans. And number five, you've got a wonderful piece of real estate downstairs. Use it.
Thank you. Okay, we have two other speakers. Yeah, you have 1 minute of general public comment.
Thank you for reminding me. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, again, what I'm referring to is the urban forests are being affected. With all the population explosion, for whatever reasons, we are now embarking on these sacred lands that we need, not only for oxygen reasons and for health reasons, but we need to exist and live. We need these urban forests. They're not being taken care of. And again, people are encroaching into these areas now because, again, the population explosion. Within 5 years, we're going to be living all in there if we don't tackle these problems right now. So let's bring down the population. Let's start letting all these illegals coming into and destroying our forests as well. Get rid of the homeless situation so we don't embark on those areas as well with a lot of transients. So, and so I say we need to do a lot of things in a city hall. You failed miserably in taking care of the problems. If anything, the homeless situation has escalated. We're not only getting people from the East Coast because it's too cold out there. They're living among us now. Thank you. God bless Donald Trump and God bless America.
Thank you. Next we have Jackie Serber, who is here to talk on items 2, 3, and 4. Ms. Serber. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for your time today.
You can move the mic up so you don't have to
Okay.
bend down.
I'm here representing Angelinos for Trees. First on number 2, we are in support of this motion. We just completed a study looking at every single tree removal request that went through Urban Forestry Division in 2018. 1,023 trees requested for removal. We're going to be releasing this report shortly. On almost every single request form, there's a section that appears which says the removal is exempt under city and state CEQA guidelines. Almost all of these trees are approved for removal and can be cut down in as soon as 3 days from the notice. This gives no time for public to oppose the request, and we desperately need a clear path to appeal this based on CEQA. So we're very much in support of this. Especially as you know, the UN announced that we have 12 years to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions or face catastrophic climate change effects. So we need our trees now more than ever, and we want a clear path to be able to appeal their removal. There's definitely an environmental impact when you're removing 1,000 trees. That doesn't include Parks and Rec, and that doesn't include private land. As we know from the DUDEC report, that's only 10% of the city's urban forest is on the land that you guys are affecting with your policies. But hopefully you'll take the next step so that the policies you're setting forth will also affect trees on private land, because that makes up 90% of the urban forest. So we really need a clear path. Moving on about number 3, I know that you guys proposed this before the DUDEC report came out. But I'm really hoping that what we see with this is really looking at DUDEC's recommendations, which I really commend you on. Number 1, their number 1 first step is a clear vision from city council, from the mayor, from leaders. We need a really strong vision from you guys. Do I have another minute?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next we have Joanne D'Antonio, also here to speak on items 2, 3, and 4. Welcome.
Hi, I'm representing the Greater Valley Glen Neighborhood Council.
Great.
We've filed CISs on all 3 of these.
You filed the CIS on these?
Yes.
We have a record of that? Okay, so then you get 5 minutes total.
Okay. We filed in favor of number 2, agenda item 2. I am chair of the Trees Committee for the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance. I post all of these on our website, all the tree removal notices. It's our data that Jackie used. We are realizing that it's very difficult to challenge a tree removal. Even when there are more than 2 trees, the transmittals come in on Friday for a hearing that's on Monday, and the public only gets 2 minutes to challenge. Even a CEQA attorney doesn't always get more than 2 minutes to challenge at these hearings. So we do need a procedure, and this is a very good motion. And I commend you, Council Member Rue, for proposing this. On the others, the other two, our main, we generally support. I worked on the DUDEC report. I was there 10 months, 2 hours a month. And I represented the Neighborhood Council Sustainability Alliance. One of the things we realized is that urban forestry doesn't have the time to conduct the professional inventory. And it is very important to consider, and more than consider, to mandate that an outside entity conduct this tree inventory. It takes an arborist to assess the species and the condition of a tree, and we don't have the leeway to allow a trainee to do this. Furthermore, they will spend a lot of time finding people and training them, and we are so behind. I get so many complaints on the Neighborhood Council for problems with trees that have not been maintained. So we need to have this outside entity. Park and Recs is not using an outside entity, and I don't think their inventory is going to be of the quality of the county, which is using an outside entity. They hired an outside entity, and their inventory is taking place as we speak. So let's be a first-class city and approach the problems that were pointed out in our DUDEC report with professionalism and do it right so that we can not be the worst city when it comes to trees of any other city in the United States, which is where we are now.
Thank you very much. Any other multiple speaker items? Don't believe so. No other multiple speakers? Okay, then we'll move to item number 1. Or actually, we can do consent. Colleagues, I'd like to propose items 5, 6, and 7 for consent. I had 8 as consent, but we do have a speaker on item 8. Any objections? Seeing no objections, items 5, 6, and 7 are approved on consent, which then brings us to item number 1. Mr. Espinosa, would you please read the item into the record?
Item number 1 is a report from the city attorney and ordinance relative to repealing a number of city ordinances that remove streets from public use.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, I know we all have issues in our district where we think, why is this so complicated to resolve? This is one of those. For me, I am really happy that we can move forward on this. We have this absurd situation where we have streets in the city of Los Angeles, some of which haven't been serviced since the Great Depression. Of the 374 streets that remain, that were removed from public use, 84 of them are in my district, which is more than any other area in district in the city. And in many cases, there's been further development on the street that were removed from public use. And these are streets, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. It's a duck. These are streets that people have been driving on, living on, using, and it's something that I've been pulling my hair out about as we've discovered more and more about the problem. And it's been a big priority, and I'm really excited. We already moved as a body to move forward to get the ordinance, and now we actually have the ordinance before us today, which is really exciting. And I want to thank Keith Mosé, Ted Allen, Ted Jordan, for working together to find a solution to officially bring these streets back into public use since they've been used as streets for so long. Before we bring them up, we have some public comment cards, and so I'd like to bring up first Bobby Wasserman, then Francie Kelly, and then Jeremy Bolt. Ms. Wasserman, please come on up. Ms. Wasserman is someone who knows firsthand. She has a street, one of the 84 streets in my district. She has the unfortunate pleasure of living on that street and having to suffer through this, and my hope is that when we get this through, that will make your life and everybody's life a little easier, because now we'll actually have some leverage to get these things done. But the time is yours.
Thank you. And I just want to thank everyone in this room, including all the people in the galley. No one created this problem. It was, created in 1936. That was before my mother was born. So, and I'm sure all of your mothers too. So I want to really thank Bob Blumenfield and the City Council for moving forward on this and showing some leadership in resolving a problem that really should have been resolved decades ago. So thank you. I just wanted to come up as one of the faces of this. We had an article in the LA Times about the San Miguel Street, which is a 380-foot street segment. And just to add to Councilman Blumenfield's comments is that not only are these streets used for personal use, the government recognizes them as streets because trash is picked up, federal mail is picked up. These are streets in working order, and there's no signs, there's no barricades, and the law was written when the valley was just being developed. So again, I just wanted to thank you. I had extensive property damage due to this street, and thank you for putting it back in service.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Francie Kelly, followed by Jeremy Bolt.
I have photos. Can I leave them for you all?
Certainly. You give them to Mr. Espinosa.
Hi, David Rue is my council person, and thank you all for being here. My name is Francie Kelly. I have lived on Ferenczi Avenue since 1980. That's a long time. I was 5. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, we didn't learn that our street was, quote, withdrawn until 2011, which means we live on a street that's private, but we don't know about it. How could it be that that information wasn't disclosed to us? No one on the street knew that. It also includes Seattle and Del Zorro. Those are the worst streets in our neighborhood. And I'm grateful that this is being dealt with. What I'm here for today is to really, really plead with you to address the streets like this one and ours that are now a danger. You guys are liable, and there's going to be a lawsuit. Somebody is going to get hurt. And it is such a joke that money is spent to bring a truck up with a wheelbarrow and a couple of shovels.
Finish your thought. Go ahead.
Okay. How the problem is dealt with to keep them passable is just such a joke and a waste of money. The most serious streets, like ours, must be addressed first. I'm thanking you, and I'm pleading you for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Jeremy Bolt.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Bolt. I live on Ferenczi Avenue. I'm a co-block captain with...
Hold the mic up so we can hear you. I'm sorry. Perfect.
Jeremy Bolt. I live on Ferenczi Avenue. I'm co-neighborhood block captain with Francie. I moved to the neighborhood in 2014. I was not advised by my real estate agent or the seller that the streets were private. I was deeply shocked to discover they are private. I believe it is now affecting property prices. The effect on the property prices will obviously affect property taxes. I believe if you reinstate the streets, the property prices will be maintained, which will be more property taxes to the city. I work all over the world. I make films. I've just returned from Africa, Southern Africa and Namibia. The streets in this district are worse than anything I've seen in these third world countries. This is not befitting a city on the level of Los Angeles. And I applaud your leadership, sir, in your attempt to address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I leave more pictures.
Okay. Okay, we'll bring up staff now. I think we have Mr. Mose. That's right. Go ahead. What's that? You want to say before we questions? Sure. Mr. Wu, you want to go ahead and ask your or make your comments, and then we'll hear their presentation. Okay. Okay. Go ahead. I know we've and I should say to you and everyone listening, we've heard the item in the sense that we spent a long time on this when we were creating the direction, and I know what's before us now is just the ordinance. So we don't need to rehash everything, but if there's anything you want to state, and we can ask a few questions here and there as well, although we've thoroughly discussed it already. So go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon. Ted Allen, Deputy City Engineer with the Bureau of Engineering. As you mentioned, Councilmember, we've discussed a lot of this before, so I'll give the kind of shorter version update. One of the items recommended before was to overturn certain ordinances that had withdrawn streets, and so that's what's before the committee today. There were a few other recommendations in the committee report, so we just give a quick update on those. The initial spreadsheet that the Bureau of Engineering had introduced to the council file had, I believe it was 374 streets. These ordinances will overturn about 200, and I forget the exact number, 220-ish, a little over 220 streets. The other ones that we had on our list were some that in our computer database showed withdrawn, but they weren't linked to ordinances, they were council actions. So we're still going through those and looking at them to see if they are similar to these types of ordinances and should be recommended for overturning, or they were something completely different and the database just lumped them together. So, but the ordinance before you today has all of the ordinance-related streets that were on that initial spreadsheet that we had uploaded. And if we find some of those other council actions were similar with the remaining streets, we will work with the city attorney to bring those back before you. We've also identified a few more ordinances that we didn't know about before that weren't on our spreadsheet. We're going to look to see if the reason they weren't in our system was just because they were so old no one knew about them, we never came across them, or maybe the streets had already been returned and that's why they weren't shown. So we will look through those as well, and if we find any that still have streets withdrawn, we will work with the city attorney to bring those ordinances back as well for repeal.
I appreciate this, and I know it's a lot of times this kind of forensics is not, it's not like anything modern where you can click a few things on the computer. You've got to go into the dusty annals of Piper Tech to figure some of this stuff out, but right. Go ahead.
Keith Mosey, Assistant Director of Bureau of Street Services. Concurrently, while this is being done by Bureau of Engineering, we're going out with Bureau of Engineering staff, Bureau of Street Services, to physically assess the streets, each location. It's 108 lane miles total. And we're trying to determine if we put back into the street network that we can simply just pave them, or if they require reconstruction, or if they require more extensive work for each location. So from that, we'll develop a work plan with BOE as far as to determine how much it will actually cost us to basically put these streets back into the street network. Best case scenario, if there are no issues, possibly you can actually just put into a regular resurfacing program. Worst case scenario may require, like say bulkheads, may require full reconstruction, things like that. So these are type streets that we don't go out and actually do a PCI rating on these type streets, but we are going to do a physical assessment now to make these type of determinations for a work plan.
And to kind of rephrase what you're saying, because we were talking about it, because everybody wants to know how much does it cost to fix all these streets. And we don't know yet because you haven't done all of the reporting on it in terms of each of the individual streets, but if you use an average of $260,000 a lane mile, it could be about $28 million. And it could be a little bit more if you're saying if there's curb cuts and other things, could bump it up to 30, but it also could be less if some of these streets do not require full reconstruction. Maybe it doesn't cost $260,000, maybe it costs $80,000. So that's the ballpark figure. So when everybody wants to know how much does it cost us, we don't know, but we know, as I'm just learning from you from the conversation a few minutes ago, it's probably somewhere between $15 million and $35 million in that ballpark. It's a big ballpark. And then to put that in perspective, our annual, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, our annual street budget's about $200 million, about 120 or so for street resurfacing and the remainder for reconstruction, which means in each district that's about $12 million. So theoretically, it would take the entire budget of my district to just do the streets that are currently out of service. So it may take a little bit of time, but we may have to figure out a way to fund those separate and apart. But the bottom line, it's not hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not inconceivable. It is a good chunk of money, and we're going to have to figure out how to do it. And like I say, this is not a new cost to the city. This is just recognizing our obligation, because we already have, this is already a cost. People are already getting injured. Someone mentioned lawsuits. We're already liable when someone gets hurt there. So this is a cost. We're now just finally being more transparent about it. Mr. Root, you had a comment or question? Your mic's on. Oh, here you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Blumenfield, in particular for letting me co-present this motion today, because unfortunately, while you are number one with 84 streets, I am not far behind with 81 streets in my district. And I also want to thank the department for undertaking this effort, and we've had long, extensive conversations. And of course, I want to thank my constituents from Council District 4 who came and brought these pictures for my colleagues to see. But just to let you know, I want you to know that both Del Zuro, Forenzi, and Seattle are all included on this list that will be reinstated. And as we stated before when we first introduced this motion, this is a no-brainer. Whether these streets are withdrawn or reinstated, the city of LA was liable, as stated by the chair and our constituents. And this ordinance now is the first step. It seeks to first reinstate all of these withdrawn streets, and then paves the way, no pun intended, to repair a number of streets in the city, as well as in particularly Council District 3 and 4, where many are, as you can see from these pictures, impassable for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians. It's critical, however, that these public streets meet the standard use, meets the city's standard use for safe usage as soon as possible. And thank you, and I know you guys have been working hard on the actual plan, but can you kind of give us a timeline on when you see, when we could start seeing some of these streets being fixed, or how it's going to be incorporated?
Well, first, once the ordinances are repealed, best case scenario, if this were to be resolved as possible going into next fiscal year, will be the soonest. Best case scenario for the streets that don't require comprehensive work, we could start including some streets.
Okay, so it could start as early as next year?
Yes.
Okay. But it would, as the chair stated, it would have to be looped into the entire infrastructure budget and street repair budget, right? Which we'll be able to discuss again.
Basically, it's almost like we have other ordinances going on as well, or other motions going on related to hillsides. We're also looking at failed streets in general for the street network. But as we're coming up with a multi-year plan to address all streets within the entire street network, for failed streets, resurfacing, slurry seal, everything all-inclusive, hillside streets, concrete streets. We're trying to do a comprehensive work plan for everything. We're actually working on a multi-year plan for these types of streets.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really want to thank the department as well, because I believe for the past recent years, especially our committee has been really revamping the entire infrastructure and street repair policy, where we're going to not just include these withdrawn streets, but also start tackling the DNF streets, as well as concrete streets and alleys and everything that has been neglected for so many decades. So I really thank you for all your effort, and really look forward to seeing the plan get fleshed out.
And the good news is some of their new technology is coming on board, and you guys have been very forward-thinking with 1781 material and others that can hopefully allow us to do this more lane miles for less. Any other? Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield, and thanks to both of you and everyone else who's on this motion for your leadership, because clearly these are streets. They're just not getting serviced. So I would argue that they need to make their way up to the very top of the priority list for resurfacing and work out some sort of plan to get them all taken care of, starting with the worst ones on down. Point of clarification on this, I've flagged a few of the streets that are in my district, and one that used to be, a number of these streets that are flagged here are halfway streets, and then the other half, they're staircases. So, to my knowledge, some of these streets have been resurfaced. And then on one street that used to be in the 13th district, includes a street that I used to live on as a starting point. And I know that there are fire gates that separate the segment that's highlighted here that has never been, it's one of those paper streets, so-called. I just want to make sure that no resources are wasted on these streets that don't have houses on them and don't need that kind of investment that you're talking about for curb and gutter. I'm sure you have a handle on that, but I was just, if there could be some clarification on how those are addressed.
Yeah, so Ted Allen, again, Deputy City Engineer with the Bureau of Engineering. Some of these streets on the list, as you mentioned, are unimproved or similar to what we would call paper streets, essentially. overturning these ordinances will essentially make them like any other paper street or unimproved street. So you're right, we will not necessarily go out and pave and develop something that was a paper street before just because it was on the withdrawn streets ordinance. So I think most of them would not be in that category, but that's what our teams are going out and looking at them for, to figure out kind of how to categorize each one.
Thank you.
I mean, I think that's an important distinction, which is we are not accepting new streets into our grid because there's a host of rules about that. When we do that, we have to bring them up to code, gutters, sidewalks, etc. And in some cases on the hillside, that's the last thing that the homeowners want, is for their property to be reduced and to put in a sidewalk in certain cases, which was what we would have to do if as I understand it, if we were to accept streets into our network. We're not doing that. We're overturning these ordinances that took them out of the network. So in a sense, they're grandfathered back in, and they're subject to all the regular rules. If they're a paper street, if they are on a street that was not brought up to code, they can still exist in our network as not up to code. It's different than bringing a new street in. It's basically recognizing that it was faulty to take it out in the first place. Is that correct?
Yeah, sometimes we accept dedications for new paper streets as part of a tract, but initially, generally, it would be the developer, property owner that would build out streets initially. Also, in this case, in an ideal world, that's what would have happened, but these are obviously so old, and hillside development was very different than the way we do development now, so we've got these kind of, they were built out originally, but to standards that are much less than today, so that's what the city's tackling now, is how to improve them and to what degree and that sort of thing, and that's what our teams are going out and looking at them for.
Ms. Martinez.
Colleagues, what I thought was interesting in the article that I was reading, that's dated back to May of last year, was, so in the article it's mentioned that some of these streets that were withdrawn had actually gotten repaved without rhyme or reason. So the fact that we were repaving streets that were out of commission is interesting, how they got repaved to begin with. Do you have a sense as to where those are going to hit on the priority list? Are we maintaining those streets you read the article?
Yes, I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
I think it's actually more insulting that people have been complaining about these streets not getting serviced, but yet some of them that were not on the list somehow got serviced.
We did get requests from time to time periodically for these type of streets. We do maintain a database of all the streets that were withdrawn from public use, and we literally sometimes stop at the edge of where these streets are. We may jump a street and skip a block. And so we do basically, in the past, we have paved some withdrawn streets at request to put, like, say, minimal blankets, things like that. But we have been involved in litigation in the past, and so from that standpoint, we had to stop from that point. Because what happened...
So we got sued, and that's why we had serviced some of these streets?
Well, that's part of it. That's part of the reason. But basically, there's a lot of issues on these streets that require major improvements that cannot be addressed as far as just by putting a simple coat of asphalt over it. And so once we touch these streets, we accept we accept a lot of things. And so from that standpoint, we took the position, for lack of a better term, to stop paving those type streets.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership, Mr. Rue, for raising this issue. Clearly, we are undoing a wrong, and we owe that to the people that we serve in the city. I, for one, can tell you 38 streets, majority of them are in Wilmington, which is an environmental justice community surrounded by heavy industrial, to the south, the port, to the north, to refineries, and we can do and we shall do better. Which leads me to part of some of the instructions from Street Services and Bureau of Engineering as far as the annual work plans. Now that we are undoing a wrong, what are your plans on identifying funding sources? As we know, Measure M committed to improving our streets condition. SB $1 from the state are committed to improving our streets condition. So I'm hoping as we enter the budget season that we find a pathway forward to address these streets. Again, going back to the testimony from our residents in the city, that we owe it to them. And just want to quickly hear from you what's the game plan moving forward on identifying funding streams?
So once we identify as far as the type of work that's needed, we'll develop the work plan and develop as far as what type of funding source they actually qualify for. Measure M, possibly STRF, or other funding sources, gas tax potentially, anything that qualifies. A lot of times funding sources have strings attached to them, to where gas tax, for instance, if the streets aren't improved, you really cannot apply gas tax to those type streets. STRF will have certain strings attached to it. So we have to find which one is appropriate, which one we need to apply for, or we can just include as part of the work plan. From that, we'll work with the CAO's office on that to basically see which funding source they qualify for.
Great. So, colleagues, unless there's an additional question or comment, without objection, I'd like to approve this and send it to full council. Seeing no objection, is so ordered. Wonderful. Let's move on to item number 2. Mr. Espinosa, would you read item number 2 into the record?
Item number 2 is a motion from Council Members Blumenfield, Rue, and Krikorian relative to establishing procedures that implement the right to appeal set forth in Public Resources Code Section 21151, Section C.
Great. Colleagues, this is about helping the community be more involved in the democratic process. We currently give the community an opportunity to be fully aware of the appeals process, but this is going to make the process more transparent by ensuring the public knows when their hearings, how much time they have to appeal. I'm very thankful for the city attorney's office putting this motion together. With that, I'd like to bring the city attorney, Tim McWilliams, to the podium to go into more detail about why this action is necessary and what it means.
Good afternoon, Assistant City Attorney Tim McWilliams. Just a few words about this motion, if I could. First of all, our office is in support of the motion, and we're in support of it, I would say, from a legal perspective and from what the law requires, and that is that state law really says 3 things about what's at issue today. First, it says certain CEQA determinations made by non-elected bodies must be allowed to be appealed. The city must allow those appeals to be filed to the city council. And it also says that the appeals should be handled in accordance with individual agency requirements. The city doesn't have any requirements. And then lastly, state law says that the decision-making body to which an appeal has been made shall consider the environmental document and make any required findings. So a few things about the benefit of such an ordinance. First, it would make it clear where to file these types of appeals. Not having any procedures in place is really an anomaly in our code. If someone wants to file a CEQA appeal, we don't tell them which office to file that in, and it has created confusion in the past. An ordinance could also provide a deadline by which such appeals should be filed. Currently, there is no deadline. It could provide a time frame within which such appeals could be heard, and it would also clarify, at least we would recommend that it clarify that the underlying approval that's attached to that environmental determination is stayed pending the determination of that appeal. Because what's happening here, and it's a little bit of an oddity, but that the underlying approval, be it a tree removal permit, a sidewalk repair, whatever, actually stays with the lower decision-making body, and what gets approved to city council would be the environmental component of that decision. And so there is some confusion created currently about what happens to that actual approval while the administrative process is being completed on the appeal. And it would also assure finality of decisions, because everyone would know that once the deadline to file an appeal has passed, if no appeal was filed, then the public, the applicant, everyone would know that at least administratively, that approval is final. Now, there could subsequently be a lawsuit, but it would lend some finality to that. So that's an overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great. So how did, the current procedure, walk us through how it works now and what would happen now in the future with a tree, let's say?
Well, currently, appeals, a lot of them get filed with the clerk's office. Sort of by trial and error, folks, the public has learned that that's probably the place they should be filed. Folks didn't necessarily know that. The clerk typically then refers that to the appropriate committee, And then what happens from there is varied. We've seen appeals set at committee and not be heard for almost a year. And that has drawn a lawsuit to compel the city to hear those, to find the city in violation of CEQA for failing to timely hear those appeal. And then in due course, the city council does typically take those up. Not always. Some fall through the cracks, which is not a good thing. But council will typically hear those appeal. Once the appeal is decided, the underlying approval can then move forward if the appeal is denied or not, if the appeal is granted.
Great. And who gets notified once the ordinance is passed? And how is notification done?
So our likely recommendation when we were to come back with an ordinance would be that certainly the appellant be notified and the applicant.
Great. Colleagues, any, I think this is a great step forward. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then we will adopt the motion and move it forward to get the city attorney to work on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I was just notified that on 8, we had a public speaker on 8, which we do not anymore. So we can take item 8 on consent as we originally planned. So I'd like to move quickly to that. Item 8, put forward on consent. See any objections? No objection. Item 8 is also moved on consent. That takes us to item 3. Yeah, thank you. We'll take 3 and 4 together. Mr. Espinosa, could you read both items?
Item number 3 is a motion from Councilmembers Rue, Blumenfield, Krikorian, and others relative to policies and strategies to ensure the long-term health and security of the city's urban forests. Item number 4 is a motion from Councilmembers Rue, Blumenfield, and others relative to recommendations for the hiring of a Director of Community Forestry and additional staff to support the city's urban canopy. Both of these items have also been referred to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Great, thank you. And this is, Mr. Rue, I'm very excited about your leadership on this and this issue that I've cared about as well. And since I became chair of this committee, I've wanted to restore Urban Forestry Division's budget to the pre-recession levels. And we've been pushing in Budget Committee. Last year, we were able to double it, which resulted in 20 new hires for tree surgeons and getting us back to doing tree trimming ourselves rather than outsourcing all of this work. So we've made tremendous progress. It's about the tree canopy. It's not just about planting more trees. It's about picking the right ones, maintaining them, making trees a part of repairing our sidewalks and street program. It's vital to our infrastructure to care about the trees. Big goal of mine for the valley is to green the valley and building more parks, incorporating trees into the design. We're doing it. I want to continue to do that. I'm going to ask ultimately we approve these things. But I know, Mr. Rue, you wanted to make some comments on it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make a couple of comments and add a couple of questions as well. And first and foremost, I want to thank you again, and I am very excited to partner with you to bring this motion forward, and of course the Bureau of Street Services again, to protect and revitalize our city's urban forests. Our city is blessed to have one of the largest urban canopies in the world, but it has been sidelined for way too long. If we want a rich and diverse urban canopy tomorrow, we need to update our tree policies and provide the tools and resources and funding today. The two motions before us kicks off this conversation. They address the needs in hiring and expertise in order to maintain our urban canopy. It also seeks a comprehensive inventory of our street trees and looks for ways to improve our sidewalk design and tree replacement policies. They also recognize that trees are more than accessories to beautify our street. They are central to our quality of life and to the health of our communities. And I'm so very thankful for the leadership at Street Services and, of course, by you, Mr. Chair. And I look forward to better futures, a better future for our trees. But first, I do have a couple of questions. If the department could come on up.
Mr. Spots, welcome. Have the department come up.
seeing you way too much these days. But thank
Good
you.
afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm Greg Spots, Assistant Director, and I have with me Hector Benuelos. He's the number 2 in our Urban Forestry Division. Our Chief Forester, Tim Tyson, is out sick today.
Great. Wow, and hopefully Tim gets better because we've been overworking him, but you guys have been doing an amazing job. I wanted to specifically ask about the job posting that was released for the city's first forest officer. The deadline for the application submission was December 31st, 2018, right? And my question is, how's that search going?
The Board of Public Works is actually managing that search, and the position will be in the board office. It's not actually a position in our department, so it might be best for the board secretary to answer that question.
Can someone answer?
Is there anyone here from representing the board?
We could make sure that Fernando Campos can get back to your office in the next day or two with that information. Since it's not one of our positions, we're not actually driving that recruitment process. I had heard that the deadline had been extended.
Yeah, it's been extended.
More applicants.
So, yeah, I don't know if you could answer this question as well. Yes, no one applied. We couldn't find a single applicant, so that's why the deadline was extended. And the motion before us asked for the department to report back on the feasibility of hiring not only a director of community forestry, but also staff to coordinate operations between the different departments and in the field. And the question I had, which again, maybe it's for the for the clerk, but is one city forest officer enough to get the job done?
I think that the DUDEC report about the path towards an urban forestry management plan sets forth many different tasks that are needed, and we support those recommendations. Street Services has been sort of staffed very lean, focused on operations, and we definitely could use policy people, grants people, GIS people, perhaps some people with some of the, botany type skills like you were mentioning in your motion. And there may be the need for similar or different types of positions like that in the city forester's office and the board office once that gets up and running. I think a very important area of collaboration between the various departments and you, the policymakers, will be figuring out what those needs are so that we can advance some of these more conceptual goals beyond just getting a bunch of trees trimmed and responding to tree emergencies, because really our management staff is very lean and focused on those operations.
So how's the hiring on your end? I know we augmented your budget and gave you some more staff, but is it just a function of if there's more resources and money's available for more positions that you could hire right away, or are you also having a difficult time hiring or finding qualified people?
We're not having a difficult time finding qualified people. It just takes time. But Councilmember Blumenfield actually got to visit our training in the Alabama yard for 20 new tree surgeons. So of the 55 positions that the council so graciously authorized for us, more than half have already been onboarded. And we've rented some equipment to get them out in the field right away while the equipment we're going to purchase is being ordered. So we're moving along very quickly to bring all of those capabilities, the additional trimming, the additional dead tree removal, the planting, the watering, and the root pruning on board. And this will be a really amazing fiscal year of more tree care activity of all types by city forces than any time in the last 10 to 12 years.
Agree on that. I'm very excited about that. And my goal, our goal, is to make sure that we give you those resources. And I would love our city to be equal, if not surpassing other municipalities when that have such robust urban forestry programs with extensive, biologists, botanists, you name it. So let us know if you hit any other impediments, because we are working on the funding part to make sure you have those resources. But if you have hit any impediment of any kind, please let us know, because clearly we can't even hire the forest officer, which is very concerning. So, and I know that's from a different division, but I hope that's an anomaly and not a trend. So let us know how we could help you beef up your department.
Absolutely, and while I'm here, I'd love to provide a nice piece of good news, which is that in November, we applied for a CAL FIRE grant to get the tree inventory started, and in January, we found out that we were invited to the next step of submitting a more lengthy and formal proposal. So that's usually a very good sign when you get that letter. So we're very excited about the possibility of getting a down payment on the inventory from CAL FIRE and being able to get going on that project, later this calendar year.
Great.
Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. Are we going to add tree surgeon to your moniker?
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you for this, and thank you for the update. Do you know if the CAL FIRE grant, if we get it, it will fund the entire cost of the inventory?
No, it won't fund the entire cost, but it could fund us. Most of the cost is in the physical inspection of the trees. It will fund us getting the software and getting about a third of the trees inventoried. But we're also exploring other possibilities. Some cities like New York had sort of citizen volunteers doing some inventory, and I was at a very interesting presentation at Apple earlier this week about how on your phone there's machine learning capabilities where your phone might be able to decide what kind of tree it is by looking at the leaf. So we're going to explore the possibility of developing some sort of app where we could engage the citizenry and maybe validating some parts of the inventory, because if you hire a consultant to do it, you pay on a per tree basis, and we think it would cost about $3 million to inventory all 700,000 street trees. But if we could engage the community, we might be able to express that process forward and develop a lot of public support at the same time.
Yeah, we should really do a lot of evaluating before we decide to spend $3 million on inventory when we could be spending $3 million on planting more trees. One comment I have is that, colleagues, the pre-recession level of our urban forestry staff was lacking. So I just want to put that out there. I think it's of great urgency to get to at least, at minimum, our pre-recession level of staffing in our street tree department. And so preservation is of utmost importance, and I think that the council has taken great care in relation to our required replacement of our sidewalks based on the Willits lawsuit, is taking great care in preserving as many trees as we possibly can while curing that court case at the same time. So there's that piece, and then there's just planting more trees, and then providing the resources to keep them alive. One of my priorities in office has been to plant more street trees and provide at least 3 years of watering for them, and not depend on the kindness of strangers to water them. We just pay for it ourselves so they stay alive, to give them the better chance of success. And then also planting more trees in our parks. I haven't been on this committee in a while, but I have a feeling that we're about to be in real trouble because we haven't focused on planting tens of thousands of more street trees across the city with a plan to keep them alive. And I think that we're seeing evidence of the heat island effect and climate change. We had that one day, one weekend last summer. On my street in Glassell Park, it was 116 degrees. And so I think we're feeling the effects of climate change right now, and I'm concerned that the city doesn't have an adequate sense of urgency about really a robust, aggressive approach to planting more trees and keeping them alive. And so if you could give a brief update on if you were to get the adequate staffing that you need to exert oversight and every maintenance, et cetera, what would be the reality of getting back to a million trees type initiative and actually seeing it be successful?
Right. Well, I can tell you that with 4 months of experience working with our new director, Adele Hush-Khalil, there's a tremendous sense of urgency around trees and around urban cooling. And Adele sees that as one of the greatest opportunities for this department. And so we definitely are pursuing going big in that direction. It's interesting, you know, the council provided us with 2 watering crews that we're hiring right now, and immediately their capacity was oversubscribed. There are Bureau of Engineering projects that trees are going in. There's hundreds of replacement trees going in for the sidewalk repair program. Bureau of Sanitation has tree planting grants, and they usually ask street services to provide a match for the grant of doing the watering. So we're asking for 3 more watering crews in the next fiscal year's budget, and we really need all of your support for that because we've already identified 5 tree watering crews worth of plantings that are going in, and we're going to need that capacity in order to keep those trees going.
Not surprised at all. And lastly, Mr. Chair, how closely are you working with city plants?
We work extremely closely with city plants, and for the sidewalk repair program, they and their contractors do the planting for us. But the council and mayor provided us with our own tree planting crew for the first time in many years. We felt if we were going to be leading urban cooling for the city, we have to plant some of our own trees. But we're working very, very closely with city plants. And it was city plants who took the lead on getting that DUDEC report produced.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Any colleagues, any other comments or questions on this item, on these 2 items? Seeing none, without objection, we'll move both these 2 items forward. Great. So we'll adopt the motion for both items 3 and 4. Mr. Espinosa, does that clear the desk?
The desk is clear, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank you for the warm and comfy temperature in this room. It's too hot. Are you kidding me? So thank you if you had something to do with it. Appreciate it.
Well, with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.